Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
Hey, welcome to the NonSequitur Show. Hey, I made it just in time. I actually was going to postpone this because I couldn't get a hold of my guest here. But then he messaged me out of the blue going, I'm here. So I was like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. Now, first things first, I don't think this is going to be a long stream, only because I really do have a prior commitment about 7 o'clock. And so I'd like to get ready for that. And I'll be streaming on my primary channel with Veda Snow and EK People Suck, also known as... Aaron, which are going to be talking about a completely different issue. Those of you who could figure it out, great. If not, I really don't want to bring it up on this channel. But anyways, this particular topic today is something that somebody had brought up, but they couldn't really make it for the discussion. But if they become available, I'll add them to the discussion. But it is something that I find an interesting topic because it has to do with creationism and it has to do with what's called creation science. So I have a guest here. His name's Ben Kissling. Not doxing him because that's what he goes by on his Twitter. And he's been on my other channel before. He's been on my primary channel. I don't think he's been on the NonSequitur Show before, though. Correct?
Nope.
Okay, cool. First, make sure that you guys can hear him because I hate having 5 minutes in and nobody can hear anything. So check my audio levels. But Ben is a certified actual creationist, correct? If I remember. You haven't changed, correct. Right? Awesome. So it got brought up on Twitter that that on the question of creation science, whether creation scientist or actual scientist. Now, people know my opinion actually is that creation scientists doing creationism they're not being scientists. Now, can they be scientists in their, practical lives and doing, actual science work? Sure. I mean, I have a lot of respect for certain people in the young creationist movement, believe it or not. Like, I happen to like Dr. Jonathan Safadi. Don't know why we get along. He can be very abrasive to a lot of people, but I happen to get along with the guy and have for a very, very long time. Can he do actual science? Yeah, I mean, sure. The guy's a genius. I mean, straight up, say what you want about creationism, disagree with it, but Dr. Jonathan Safadi is a certified genius. I mean, he's just really, really brilliant. And I happen to, agree with a lot of things he puts out. But, the question is, and this is where we would obviously disagree, is creationism science? And when scientists do creationism, are they still being scientists? So I brought Ben in here as a young creationist to kind of defend that position that creationists are capable of doing science in creationism. I'm not going on camera, by the way, so no, if anybody asks, not camera ready today, but you can look at Ben. So Ben, so on this particular topic, let me know why you think creationist science is science and why you think creationist science is actually doing actual science when I think you would agree it is very conflicting with modern science that we are aware of, right? I mean, you at least have to agree that creationism and modern science they're not compatible very much, are they?
Well, I would say that creation science isn't compatible with what the mainstream consensus in modern science is in a lot of areas, for sure.
Okay, and so what makes you think that a scientist let's kind of go to the basics. Do you agree with me that one? I mean, I don't adhere to scientism. I don't think that you do either. Correct? I mean, scientism would be the belief that knowledge is only acquired through science.
Yeah, so that'd be strong scientism. Weak scientism would be that it is the best form of knowledge.
I agree.
That we have.
I agree.
So,
I agree. I don't
Would you
think.
say,
Go ahead.
would you ascribe to that weak scientism?
No, I actually wouldn't. I think knowledge can be acquired by many different sources. I think science is a very good way to acquire knowledge. Absolutely a very good way to acquire knowledge, but is by no means I can't. Well, I don't know when it's the weak scientism as far as like the best. No, I still don't think. I think we acquire knowledge through many other means. I believe in a priori knowledge. I think that we can observe things but not do science to actually acquire knowledge. I would probably deny both strong and weak scientism. But that actually part of the statement of faith that Answers in Genesis has. They deny scientism, but that doesn't mean that I agree with Answers in Genesis, right? I think that both me and Answers in Genesis would say we don't think that. I absolutely don't think that scientism is the best way to go to acquire knowledge for philosophy things, right? I mean, when you're talking about God, God is excluded from science by methodological naturalism. There's no way science can even test for such a thing. Would you agree?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think you can test for certain aspects of the creator's action in the world. So I would reject methodological naturalism as a rule that is required for science.
Okay, so let me put it this way. If you want to do an experiment on God, and God has the power to influence that experiment by merely thinking differently, by will, he can change a variable that you have no control over. Because I'm sure you're familiar with science, how they have a dependent variable and an independent variable, and they have these things that they control, and they can then test for certain things that are a variable, and then make a correlation, and then derive a conclusion that says this is probably more statistically correct, right? The objective, what's called an abductive case, that is more likely the best inference as an explanation. So if God can change the parameters of the experiment, how can you ever say that the experiment was a valid experiment?
Well, I don't think, God could change the parameters of the experiment, but he doesn't in general. That's why we have scientific laws, and Christianity teaches that he sustains creation continually, which to me, in our modern understanding of nature, suggests that God is the power behind scientific laws. And so we don't believe that he just changes scientific laws whenever. So, for example, if someone were to jump off a bridge and commit suicide, that is, I would say, an evil act, or any kind of evil act that you can think of. God doesn't act to prevent that, even though he could, because maintaining the laws are important to him enough so that we have a rational world in which to act. So if God changed the laws every time we made a decision or did something, that would take away our ability to act rationally, because we could not predict what would be the outcome. So we don't believe that God just changes things willy-nilly, right? He upholds the scientific laws that maintain nature at all times. So as for testing for God, I agreed with everything you said about abduction and the inference to the best explanation. These types of reasoning can lead us to an intelligent cause for certain things, and there are certain types of things that would have to be caused by a being that's very much like God. So we'd be getting into an intelligent design argument here, rather than specifically creation science, where they specifically use an inference to the best explanation about intelligent causes. And so we would say, well, I'm sure you've heard this before, right? The argument from information, that if information exists, we only see it to be caused by intelligence today. And that gives us a pretty good inference that if we find information in the natural world, it was caused by an intelligence. And if it can't be a human intelligence because it's prior to the existence of humans, then we can infer some kind of intelligence behind whatever that information is. So this would apply to the fine-tuning argument for the creation of the universe, as well as biological information. Depending on whether you're an old Earth or young Earth, you would have a different view on when biological information was added to the universe. As a young Earther, I would say that was added at the very beginning in the first 6 days of creation. So I think that abductive inferences can lead you to intelligence as a cause. I guess that would be my response to your question.
Well, here's the problem I'm running into, because you said that, you have to obviously presuppose that God's not going to change any laws, but we know, according to Scripture, I mean, again, doing an exegesis here. I'm not as saying God exists, but according to Scripture, God has suspended laws many times. They call them miracles, right? So God can violate the laws of nature anytime He wants to, and they call them miracles. So if you're doing an experiment to test for God, if God doesn't want to be found, He can manipulate that experiment just because He doesn't want to be found. Would you not agree? I mean, how would you have any control over that experiment if God can literally change the experiment so He remains hidden?
That would be a false negative, and that is an issue with any kind of design inference, as Dembski has talked about this, a lot. A problem for a design inference would be a false positive. A false negative is not a problem, because all that means is you're back to the null hypothesis, right? But if you have a false positive, that would mean you're concluding intelligence when there wasn't really any intelligence.
Well, yeah, but the problem is that experiments trying to design whether a hypothesis is correct or not, correct? Or which is more likely, right? It's not saying that the hypothesis must be correct. It's saying it's more likely correct?
Yeah, if you get a positive result.
But here's the thing. How do you know if God is not wanting to change the experiment to suit his needs? Because God can manipulate the laws of physics according to Scripture, right? So if God says, hey, I want this experiment to be this to suit His own needs, you have no way to control that variable. So how is it doing science to test your hypothesis? If I want to do a hypothesis that God exists, I have no control over that experiment if God does exist, because He can manipulate. I mean, you're assuming that He just won't, but it shows in Scripture that He has manipulated the laws of physics before. I mean, unless He's told you directly, hey, I will not screw with your experiment, and you believe Him and you assume He's a benevolent God that doesn't lie, you have no way to control for that. And that's why I think science has methodological naturalism, because it's just something that's not even testable.
Well, I think the objection you're raising would be a problem for science if God existed. It doesn't.
Correct, but that's your hypothesis, right? I mean, you're see, one thing with science is they usually do disconfirmational evidence, right? They usually try to show something is more likely by showing something less likely. You try to find evidence against what you propose, right? Because if you throw all these criticisms against your hypothesis and they all fail, you're strengthening your hypothesis, right? And so you've already assumed God exists, and so any experiment that you're doing has that assumption that God exists, and you're also assuming if God exists, He's not going to mess with your experiment. You're making two presuppositions before you've even done the experiment. So science doesn't work like that. Science says, okay, what's the data? What's the information we're looking to explain? And generally, as why we follow methodological naturalism is because we're looking for a natural explanation for a natural phenomenon, right? And so if we see a natural phenomenon like lightning, and we want to say, okay, how do we scientifically explain this? We can't jump to some kind of supernatural causation, right? Because there would be an infinite amount of supernatural causations you couldn't even test for. And so we want to say, how do we explain this using a natural explanation? Of course, we can explain lightning, right? We can explain it by electrostatics. We don't need a God to explain why there's a lightning strike, like maybe 2,000 years ago they would have. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. What I was trying to make a distinction is between believing that God exists at all, which is what you seem to be attacking.
No. From the scientific, from the science, right? The science. How do you test for God?
If God exists at all, then your objection would basically be. It wouldn't be methodological naturalism. It would be philosophical naturalism, where you're saying if God exists at all, He could come into the lab and change something and we would never know. and therefore science is totally screwed.
Yeah, that'd be a contradiction. If
God exists, right?
If it's philosophical naturalism, God couldn't exist, right? Because you're denying any supernatural causations. You're denying the set of supernatural.
But what you're saying is that if God exists at all, for real, then he could come in and screw up with our experiments.
Would you agree with that? Well, it's not philosophical naturalism. It's philosophical, sure, but it's more ontological. Philosophical naturalism is the position that there is no supernaturalism. It's all natural. Now, I get people all the time to argue, well, if ghosts exist, it'd be in the natural realm, and God exists, it'd be natural. I think it's a really stupid argument, and there's reasons for why I think it's a stupid argument that I won't get into. But if there is a God, most people are going to say, hey, look, that's so far beyond our daily understanding. We're just going to put that in the set of non-natural, right? So you have natural and non-natural. So natural would be like, okay, why do we have lightning? Well, we have electrostatics. We have a potential difference in voltage, and then you have current flow through some least path of resistance. Boom, we can explain lightning. But if you're talking about God, then that it's so far beyond what we understand for physics, we're going to put that into the non-natural explanations because we have no way to even codify what that would even mean if God sent down a lightning strike, right? It would just violate every law of physics if there's no natural explanation for it. So we're going to put that in the supernatural set. So philosophical naturalism denies there's anything in that supernatural set. So if it is true that philosophical or ontological naturalism is the case, there wouldn't be a God. That's how I look at it, at least.
Well, right, but anyway, we can move on. We don't think that God is causing lightning strikes today. Okay, so a young Earth creationist would say we have evidence in the Bible where God has told us the things that He did. And we take that as a higher authority than extrapolations from experiment today.
So he only tells people when he does something that violates the laws of physics, like the global flood.
That's not what I said. I said when he tells us that he did something in the Bible, we believe that he did that thing. And young Earth creationism is based on that. We don't go around, or we don't say, well, he must be causing lightning strikes today. That's not relevant to historical science.
All right, well, I
think we have a historical record that's accurate and credible that's been passed down to us that contains his testimony of his actions in the world. And so we would say that when we have a historical record like that, which obviously you don't agree is history, right? But
Correct.
We would say it's history. And so because we think it's history, we incorporate that into our scientific explanations of the past, which is completely legitimate to do if you have a historical record of data or testimony, right? You can incorporate that into scientific explanations.
Well, the difference is though that you're putting it into your presuppositions. You're fitting the data to fit your presuppositions rather than to let the data form your conclusions. And that's, I think, is one of the biggest problems I have with younger creationism. Because if you set the data to correspond with your presuppositions rather than let your data form your conclusions, you are not doing science. That is the antithesis of science.
We don't change data, and we don't deny.
I didn't say data. I'll say it again, so I don't want anybody to misunderstand what I'm saying. If you change the I did say change the data. Okay, you're right. What I should say is if you pigeonhole or force fit the data to fit your presuppositions, then you're not doing science because you're not letting the data drive your conclusions. Is that a better way to put it? Because you're right. I think I did say change. I didn't mean like change it, like physically change the data, but you're changing the way the data is observed.
I don't think we're changing the way that. I think we are coming to different interpretation of the data because we allow different data to be considered. So you would reject the data from the Bible, and we would accept data from the Bible as actual data. And we would include it in the data that we are trying to explain.
Okay, so let's look at that. Let's suppose you and I wanted to find an objective fact, right? You and I, there are certain things that are just objectively true we can go discover, right? If we want to say, hey, the sun is bright. We can both walk outside in a clear day, look at the sun, and go, yeah, objectively that's bright, right? Now, there's some subjective evaluation what bright means, but we both have something we look at, right? There's an objective fact in the matter to be had that the sun puts out light, right? Neither one of us would disagree with that, right? So, with that in mind, if we didn't start with a presupposition of a God existing, let's say I wanted to know the age of the earth. You want to know the age of the earth. Without having any presuppositions whatsoever, how would a creationist scientist go about determining the age of the earth objectively?
Well, there are many different ways, but I would quibble with not having presuppositions. There's a concept in philosophy of science that talks about how perceptions are theory laden.
Yes.
And I would accept that as a universal truth about perception and observations, including observations in science.
No question about that.
All observations are theory laden.
I agree, and I think it was Quine that was putting that out, if I'm not mistaken. But
okay.
Yes, science is theory laden, absolutely. But here's the difference.
Doesn't that mean that?
No, because there's also a law of parsimony, right? You don't want to unnecessarily multiply your entities. And entities in this particular case can be your presuppositions. So, again, if I had no presuppositions as far as God existing or what the reasons was. We all have presuppositions, right? You have to at least start with the presupposition that there's a universe. Both of us have to start with that. There's no way you can get out of that.
We have to have a few others too.
Sure.
Senses are not lying to us.
Yeah, I'm not saying deny all presuppositions. I'm saying let's agree on the basal presupposition that I think science starts with. Okay, I would put forth and I straight up I agree with Thunderfoot on this. Thunderfoot was very articulate in how he put out some 3 basal science presuppositions, and I happen to agree with him. And if I remember correctly, the way he put it, 1, there's actually a universe to observe. That's a scientific presupposition. I agree with him. 2, we can observe the universe and draw inference from those observations. I agree. That's a presupposition. 3, models that have utility and make accurate predictions and correctly can accurately describe and explain observations and of course make repeatable testable predictions are more virtuous and have more utility. Basically, the models that can explain things better simplistically and have all those theoretical virtues, they're better than models that don't predict correctly. I think those are all simple presuppositions in science. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think creation scientists would agree with all of those.
I agree. No, I think they would too. Okay, so just based on those 3 presuppositions, without the presupposition that anything created anything, but I want to know, I'm going to go and I'm going to do some tests, and I'm going to do a test to determine the age of the earth, and you're going to do some tests to determine the age of the earth. We should come to the same conclusion if we're objectively evaluating the evidence. So, excuse me. The problem I'm running into is that creationist science have already signed a statement of faith saying any evidence they observe that goes against the statement that the earth is young must be wrong by fiat, which objectively, in my case, excludes them from being actual scientists. Once you've done that, you're no longer scientists. But putting that aside for a second, if we want to look at the age of the earth, how do we go about objectively measuring that? Because even the rate study concluded, and this is a rate study done by young creationists, they have concluded that the earth does have the appearance of age. They're the ones that said this. They have said, yes, we do agree that the earth has the appearance of age, but we will try to explain it, and they'll try to explain it using various things like accelerated nuclear decay and things of that nature, none of which have any evidence for. But they will try to ad hoc those explanations because, again, they have to fit it to their presupposition that the earth is young. By removing that presupposition that earth is young, you don't have the need to try to, by fiat, discount that data. So how would you go about finding the age of the earth? If you were a scientist, just a scientist, not a creation scientist, just a scientist, what do you think would be the good way to do it?
Well, if we might measure the rate of helium diffusion out of zircon crystals.
Which, by the way, as you know, because I've talked to you about it, has been thoroughly debunked, obviously.
Well, I know you think that, and
it's beyond measure. Yeah.
Just for the audience's sake, you sent me a whole bunch of material on that is very new, and I haven't had a chance to look at it. It was a couple days ago, and I'm not a physicist.
Yeah,
so.
we could touch on it for the audience that hasn't been updated on that. So the rate study got a long time ago, did a study on some minerals, some zircon rocks from Fenton Hill and some other places, and they basically were trying to measure how much helium was left in the rock because of radiometric decay. For those who remember the basic physics, uranium will decay, and over billions of years it decays into thorium, it will decay into radon, it will decay into eventually lead. But in those intermediate steps, there's a lot of things in the decay chain, and when those decays happen, some of them produce what's called an alpha particle, which is a helium ionized nucleus. It's basically 2 protons, 2 neutrons that have been stripped away of electrons. So it's basically helium without the electrons. This is why they call them helium diffusion rates. Now, most of them obviously will eventually become neutral by getting electrically neutral with electrons. But the helium nuclei itself, which is the atomic, alpha particle, will eventually become helium because it absorbs the electrons to become neutral. And so we want to know was how much helium is trapped in there over all these countless billions of years of radiometric decay. And the fun fact is it really doesn't tell you the age of the Earth. Helium diffusion rates doesn't tell you how old the Earth is. And what it tells you is just how much helium's in there. That's all it tells you. When you actually look at the modeling that they used, their modeling was very, very bad. As Dr. Loechelt, who's an expert in solid-state physics, pointed out, and this is his genre, this is what he does professionally. He pointed out to rate study and Dr. Humphreys, who did get his math wrong multiple times. It is basic math that he got wrong. But he pointed out to him, if you're going to do this type of domain modeling, when you look at the high temperature and the low temperature, the high temperature, I believe, was about 300 degrees Celsius, and the low temperature was, I think, 180 or 80, if I'm not mistaken, but it's somewhere in that ballpark.
Basing that on the depth of the sample?
The depth of the sample has to do, the depth of the sample, the pressures and temperatures involved. And so when you're doing this multi-domain modeling, you can't just do some kind of linear, stick things together and put a logarithm with it and say this is the model. It doesn't work that way. The math for logarithms don't work that way. If you look at logarithms, ln a plus b does not mean ln a plus ln b. It doesn't distribute like that. You can distribute over multiplication. Ln a times b would be ln a plus ln b. So it's a times function, not a addition function. And he put it as an addition function, which is weird. But long story short, the domain modeling was completely wrong. But if you look at the modeling, it only tells you how much helium's in there. And so for them to try to use it as a chronological measure of the age of the Earth is not just strange, but it's incongruent with what we would actually be using to measure the age of the Earth, which is isochron dating or some kind of radiometric dating that's going to say, okay, these long-term radioactive particles that we know have a very, very long half-life, we can say, okay, here's the how much ratio we have from the product the dotted product to the parent product, and draw some really interesting graphs called isochron graphs based upon chronometric formula and say, okay, this is how old something is. And it's extremely precise. And even rate data said, yes, these are methods they use that do indicate the Earth is billions of years old. But then they say, but they're wrong because, and they'll put some ad hoc explanation like what's called accelerated decay. The problem, and then you can by all means respond, but the problem with the heat problem is, and you asked me to explain this to you, that's why I'm going long-winded. The heat problem is such that if there was such a thing as accelerated nuclear decay, the heat would be so great that they would have to account for, and I'm not even joking here, they measured it in joules, it would be so high that it would liquefy the crust of the Earth. This is a problem in young Earth creationism. This is an unresolved problem. Humphreys has unresolved it. Even Rate has said this is still an outstanding problem. The heat problem, because they have to start with that presupposition that the Earth is young, they need to account by physics, not just by some kind of miracle, right? That like Gentry tried to do with his radiometric polonium halos. He just said, well, God did it that way, which took him out of the realm of science. After it was exposed that there was a natural method by which these halos came about, that's why you never hear anything about these polychloric halos any longer, because Gentry's work has been so debunked. But They
Well,
admitted.
the rate study's assumptions themselves reject that kind of argument.
Well, we'll get into
No, it was already understood that that was wrong by the time the rate study came out.
what, the halos?
You wouldn't suggest accelerated radiometric decay if you thought that the starting amount was lower. Which is
why
what
would you?
Gentry's argument means, right? Is that
Well,
he
no,
was saying that there wasn't as much of the original material because the first decay steps were not evident in
Well, no,
rock.
not exactly. Actually, Gentry, what he did was he did not even claim that caloric halos were evidence of young Earth. What he claimed is that these radiometric polonium halos were evidence that the Earth had solidified relatively quickly within about, I think he said 2 weeks. Don't quote me on that, but if I remember correctly, it's been 4 years since I did a presentation on this, but I think it was 2 weeks or so. It was a very short period of time. So he was talking about how quickly the Earth formed rather than the age of the Earth, which was a pretty significant difference, right? However, the young Earth creationists can say, hey, look, the Earth formed within weeks, therefore the model fits the young Earth creationist, paradigm. It doesn't show anything about the age of the Earth. It just shows how quickly things cooled off, because for the people, those who don't know, the radiometric halos for polonium were such that you have these parent halos, which were radiometric decays that went in a 360 sphere, and when you cut them in half, you get a two-dimensional circle. And each isotope had a different amount of energy level attached to it, right? Because each atom, that when it produces a photon, that photon is going to have some kind of energy level attached to it in VV. The higher energy level, the more penetrating power it has, generally speaking, right? So you would find these halos to be different sizes. And what he found was in these biotites that the halos for the parent isotopes of like uranium and thorium and plutonium were not always in the same location as the daughter isotopes, which would be for like radon and radium and radioactive lead. And so he concluded that these smaller and less energetic halos formed independently of the parent ones. Right. And so he was like, this is indicating that this had to cool really quickly, and these formed in stasis and not from parent isotopes. But it came to discover by many other people's work that during the chain of decay, there's an element called radon-222. And radon-222 happens to be gaseous, and it causes gaseous diffusion through microfissions of the rock. And so because of water solubilities and diffusion rates, we actually can show that these gaseous transports can migrate from the parent isotope to the daughter isotopes, and therefore is explained by science. Gentry's work was then debunked, and so his counter to this was, well, this was just a one-time event that God did, and he called them singularities that God created in situ. And then at that point, obviously, you're taken out of science.
Okay, can I?
Yes.
Shortly. So I would agree with you that is not a good explanation, even from a creation science point of view. And there have been creation scientists who give explanations like that. Whenever they have, so for example, they have a theory and there's something that's not satisfactory about the theory, and they say, well, God must have done something to rescue their theory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not an appropriate way
of
doing science, and yes. I would agree with that.
That's a rescue device.
Yeah, it is. And if you have a rescue device like that, the onus is on you to figure out a scientific explanation for that. Because why do scientific explanations, even on the basis of creation science, if all you're going to do is any problem with it, God must fix it for you? God's not limited by being required to do whatever is necessary to make theories successul.
Yeah,
it's probably likely that there's something wrong with the theory, or there needs to be more work done on it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And by the way, for the audience, you and I have talked prior, and you said you hadn't read everything, and you said before we go live, if I could explain it to you, and I would in detail, that'd be fine. So that's why I'm going into more long-winded, because you wanted to know, because you didn't have time to look at all this stuff before.
Okay, well, yeah. I thought it was going to be about that new material, not Gentry's stuff.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But I wanted the audience to have a clearer picture of why creation science isn't really science. But okay, so going back to the helium diffusion rates. It doesn't.
Being wrong doesn't mean you're not scientific.
Well, yeah, that's true. But the problem again is that the creationist science will say that any science that goes against the earth is wrong. That's not science. At that point, you cannot be doing science because science is objective.
No,
it's data driven.
Because we would say that the Bible has data in it, and you can't go against that data.
That's not empirical data, though. See, this is where I think that you make a very huge category error. The Bible, as a historical document, has value, and I know a lot of atheists that love the Bible. Okay, I don't particularly get it, whatever, but they happen to be, I know people that are PhDs in biblical research and that kind of stuff, and master's degrees, and they're atheists. More power to them. They find it fascinating. We need that. I think it's important that there are some people that really enjoy that stuff. I'm not one of them, but that's not empirical data, though, right? Empirical data is data that.
Let me give you an example of when people on your side of this question have used historical data in a scientific theory. And one of them is to verify the accuracy of radiometric dating by using historical records that date the eruption of Mount Vesuvius at AD 79 or whatever it was, and then dating rocks from that eruption using a radiometric dating method. And then they say, look, we've got it so that it matches the historical date. And that means that our method is valid.
Well, let me tell you why that's incorrect.
If you found that the method did not match that historical date, you would doubt the method, would you not?
Well, here's why that's a problem with that. These are confirmational methods, right? When we look at things like Mount Vesuvius and you look at things like dendrochronology, these things happen to indicate that our dating methods are correct, right? There's a correlation there. We would expect a correlation if the dating methods are correct, right? But you would have a consilience of multiple different lines of evidence that are observed, because when you look at dendrochronology, you can observe the tree rings. You can note how long does it take for a perennial tree ring to form, whether it forms 1 or 2, whatever it is annually. We can know by observing that tree growth what the tree ring rate is, and you can actually say, okay, based upon the dendrochronology, excuse me, that this correlates to what we would expect for radiometric dating. But this is actually specific to carbon dating, because one of the problems we have with carbon dating is that because of nuclear testing, there's up to a 3% change, a fudge factor in carbon dating because of nuclear testing. And there's also a fudge factor because of the way the initial way we looked at carbon dating from how we defined the half-life of carbon dating to what there is now. So there is a little bit of error margin there that we have to account for. They don't have that problem with isochron dating. They don't have that problem with promethium or samarium or uranium or lead or argon or potassium. They don't have those kind of problems because that type of dating is not the same as carbon dating. Carbon dating works on a completely different principle. And so carbon dating doesn't require you to even know carbon dating requires you to know the initial amount, but not in isochron dating. So because they have all these problems with carbon dating, and the half-life is so quick, was it 5,730 plus or minus 20, if I'm not mistaken? I'm pulling that out of my head, so somebody fact check me on that. But I think it's 5,000.
That number sounds right.
Yeah, I'm really just pulling on that. I'm not googling anything, but I think it's 5,720 plus or minus 20 or 30, if I remember. It's in that ballpark, right?
My
because it varies.
chemistry professor in college told us maximum for carbon dating was 90,000 years.
Okay, that's as far as you can go back with what's called accelerated mass spectrometry, right? You can go back 90 to 100,000 years. That's true, right? Because you're dealing with such a low concentration that your error bar is so high that you wouldn't get a correct amount. So yes, I would accept that using the most sophisticated techniques of accelerated mass spectrography, that the furthest you're going to be able to go back is about 90, maybe 100,000 years nowadays. I think everybody would probably agree with that, I think. But you want to test for something that's millions of years old and billions of years old, then yeah, obviously you can't use carbon dating, which I've seen creationists argue carbon dating tries to prove the age of the Earth. No, it doesn't. No scientist has ever said this. No scientist has ever said this. But creationists have said this before.
Which creation scientists?
Well, I mean, you find these in groups. I mean, I'm not going to say like a PhD scientist, maybe. But I mean, and if you go to these creationist groups, you will find very ignorant creationists saying,
you mean like Facebook groups?
yeah,
with random people
right,
online? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Look, they don't know what they're talking about. I get that. And by the
There
way,
are lots of people who don't know what they're talking about. You don't have to be a creationist to not know what you're talking about online on a Facebook group.
Yeah, your group is not the only one that has those. Trust me. The non-believers have them as well. But anyway, so going back to the rates.
That's why we need these organizations, right? Is to have creation scientists who check each other and put out peer-reviewed journals.
Well, they don't. No, they don't put out peer-reviewed journals. Creationists do not have peer-reviewed journals. No, they do not.
Yes, they do. There's one called the Creation Journal. There's
I know.
Research
Well,
Journal.
hang on.
The Creation Research Society that has a conference. There's an international conference on creationism.
Those are not peer-reviewed. I can tell you right now, they're not.
How do you know? Have you?
Ben, I'm literally mentioned in the Journal of Creation. I am literally mentioned in issue 43 by Dr. Humphreys in the Journal of Creation. Those are not peer reviewed. What they are is
I've published on their website, and I had 2 peer reviewers, and it wasn't even in the journal.
I'm telling you,
for a fact. You think they're not doing peer review for the journal?
I'm telling you for a fact, those are not peer review journals. Okay. So let me explain what's going on here. What they do is they send their review to somebody who's already just a younger creationist, and they say, hey, can you check this? And if it's so not egregious, they'll let it fly. But they do not send it to an independent. Peer review is independent. I had a peer review.
Independent of who?
What do you mean? It's a pre. I should be able to say.
What is your criteria for being independent?
It means they have no religious bias on it. They have no ideological bias on it. Physics is physics.
No peer reviewers can be religious or younger.
That's not what I said. But let me ask you this. Why? Let me ask you this.
So the only legitimate peer reviewers would have to be non-religious.
I've never said that. Never said that.
You said they had religious bias.
Let me explain why that is not the case. Dr. Loechelt wrote his paper on the debunking of accelerated nuclear decay, right? And he mentioned to me in the acknowledgments either. He went to creationist scientists and he said, will you publish this on your webpage? Okay. They denied it. Even let me finish. Well, in the journal. Okay. First it was in their journal. They wouldn't even do that. Then they wouldn't put it on their webpage. But he wanted to publish it in the Journal of Creation. They denied him. They did not find any errors in his paper. Okay. They did not find any errors in his paper, but they denied publishing it. So he went to another publication, which was a Christian journal, which is peer-reviewed. So you could be a Christian and have peer review, but those peer reviews go to physicists. It doesn't matter the religion of the physicist. That physicist could be Muslim, they could be Jewish, they could be Christian. Physics is physics. But when they wanted to publish in the Journal of Creation, even though his physics wasn't wrong, they didn't find anything wrong with it, they wouldn't do it. That is not how peer review works.
Not finding something wrong with a paper is not the only reason why you would reject a paper. Just try to be a young earth creationist or an intelligent design theorist sometime and publishing a paper in a mainstream journal.
But they're not getting an objective view. If the creationists had
science is not totally objective. It never has been, and it never will be.
It's about as objective as you can possibly try to be. I don't know what would be more objective. But by the way, the journal you put it in is called Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. It is an actual peer review journal.
I believe you. I'm just saying that not finding a problem in a paper is not the only reason you wouldn't publish it.
But I think that the problem is, though, when you're talking about peer review, it should go out to any physicist, and it doesn't matter what their belief is, and say, is this correct or not, right? They don't do that with young creationists because some of their papers are flawed. I mean, I would say almost all of their papers are flawed, but I mean, creationists, if they were to say
they're young earth creationists, you would say that they're flawed because they're not scientific.
No, I wouldn't.
They're a young earth view.
I wouldn't.
That's your whole premise here is that creation science is not scientific.
But if their physics is correct,
not scientific, that would be a reason not to publish it in a scientific journal.
No.
So if your presupposition is that creation science is not scientific, then that would be reason enough for someone of your view not to publish it in a scientific journal.
No, because if their paper was correct, then if they sent it out to a person who's a physicist, they would be able to say this is correct or this is not correct. For example, Humphrey's work was not correct. He sent it out. Humphrey's work was by Sean Cook and Dr. Hugh Ross, who is a friend of mine, and I have a lot of respect for him. He's a Christian. They both reviewed Dr. Humphrey's physics. They found math errors. Would you agree math is objective?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. So
purposes of discussion, we can say that.
So they objectively found that Humphreys had math errors. No journal is going to print something that has math errors. I would imagine, right?
Well, I can't speak to that. I don't have a physics degree and I don't have physics training. I came here to talk about the statements of faith that young Earth creationist organizations have.
Okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Real quick, a flame for $5 says, "How do you verify secret peer reviewers have no biases? You're just complaining about a journal you don't like." No, not at all. Like I said, I mentioned in the Journal of Creation, but the bias would show if you have 10 people that are saying there's a math error and one person says there isn't. Those 10 people are going to get together. Probably that one person say, "Hey, you may need to reevaluate how you understand math," right? Because math is objective. If I tell you that 1 + 1 = 3 and you say 1 + 1 = 2, people are going to come to me and say, "Steve, your math is off," right? Because you can objectively show this. So the problem with your creationist papers is they always have these bizarre major errors to them. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you remember Dr. Tompkins. He's a geneticist with Answers in Genesis.
I don't think that this is going to get us anywhere. What the issue is there's a lack of trust between the two communities.
No, it's not conspiratorial. This is not conspiratorial. We'll stick with the science, right?
I legitimately would not trust you to review a
I'm not an expert.
Paper.
Yeah, I'm not an expert.
I have seen enough of non-creationists who are virulently, adamantly opposed to young Earth creationism, who say it's not science. And I have seen them criticize things on issues about which I do have some technical knowledge. And they always say, "Oh, this is terrible. It's just wrong. It's horrible." And when I look at it, I see that they're exaggerating.
Can you give me an example?
Okay. Not off the top of my head.
Can you send me something later?
What?
Can you send me something later?
I could go back on some forums I've been on and find some things like that if you'd like. But the issue is that I don't trust anyone who is using the kind of language that you do to be totally objective about that sort of thing.
What is your area
and
again?
there isn't a way to be totally objective.
What is your area again? I honestly don't remember. It's been so long. I know you've been on before.
I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry.
Biochemistry, okay. So you know Seigart, right? Dr. Seigart?
Yes, I know who he is.
He's a Christian. He rejects young creationism, and he's got a PhD in your area of expertise.
Yes.
Okay. So he has. But do you think he's biased?
There's lots of Christians who have the same bias against young Earth creationism when it comes to that.
But do you think he's biased? I agree with you to some degree. Everybody has a little bias. Yeah, I agree with that. But I think that when you're objective, when you try to review a paper, if you find a math there, I really don't think how bias comes into play. Or if you find, let me give you an example.
When you're talking about a physics paper, in a physics paper, the math is never just abstract math. It always means something. And
sure, I guess. No, I think that it's a lot of it's abstract
physics to know that variables and things like that have to have parameters attached to them, and they represent things. Okay, so if you're talking about such a simple math error as failing to do the correct operation on some natural logarithms, that
was true. That was Humphreys did that.
But I haven't seen that paper, and I would want to look at it myself before I.
Yeah, I'll put it in the live chat right now
as a conclusion.
So, and I'll put it in the video description.
I have a hard time believing Humphreys would make a.
He did. I'm really not even joking. It was a very, very simple error that high school math anybody would know. So I put the paper in the video description too, so you can go back later.
Okay, well I can look at that.
And by the way, he did kind of more privately admit that he made a math error. He admitted he made a math error privately, but it was more so what. He didn't use it in some other stuff, and he's right about that. He didn't use it for one of his other models, and I get that, but still. The fact that he was still arguing when he was asked how did he derive this model for the helium diffusion rates, he came up with, and he sent it to me. I have it on the Great Debate Community page. He sent it to me directly, and it was a response to Dr. Loechelt, and he wanted me to disseminate it, and I did. And that math error is in there, And Dr. Loechelt wrote a paper and then showed that math error was there. And then again, he just was like, well, it's no big deal. But I'm like, dude, you were saying that you didn't make. He was saying that he didn't make a math error for a very long time, and yet myself, Dr. Loechelt, and Dr. Henke was saying this is high school level math, and you made a mistake. And just to make sure, I sent it to Landon, who's a math expert. And he's like, yeah, it's clearly an error, right? But I think it's hubris. I think that they just don't want to make admit they made such a simple mistake because they're so ingrained to say that, look, this has to be the case. Accelerated decay has to be the case. Helium diffusion rates has to prove this.
Issue of you just admit from the outset that you don't think creation science is science.
It's not.
So why should we trust you when you're so biased against us?
It's not a matter of bias. I've looked at the data. I've looked at their papers. Every paper they have has found error. Go to Talk Origin. Talk Origin explains all their errors, right? I mean, like I said, I'll give you a perfect example. And
I've read lots of Talk Origins articles.
I'll give you.
I know the kind of approach that is taken there, and they are often exaggerating and wrong sometimes.
I'll give you an example, though. Dr. Tompkins put out a paper a long time ago where he said that the genomic comparison for a whole genome comparative between humans and pan-troglodytes or chimpanzees was 70%. Do you remember that number? Does that strike anything with you?
He had three numbers with three different methods. One of them was 70%, and two of them were in the 80 percentile.
Okay, so you do remember that.
More confidence for the 80% number.
You do remember that then, right?
Yes, okay. I remember that.
So, do you know who it was that discovered that he made a huge blunder in his 70% number?
Richard Buggs. I'm just guessing.
No, it was Ruhiff, actually. He was a lay genetic person, a very brilliant genetic guy. And he's the one that helped me get this channel back. He's one of the nicest guys ever in the world, and I wish him the best. But he discovered that Tompkins had an error because he used an outdated program called BLAST. And this version of BLAST that he had a bug in it. It had a well-known bug in it that was discovered, and it was pointed out to him that the version he used had a bug in it. And Tompkins admitted to this, and he retracted that paper that he wrote for the Creationist journal. Said that
I remember that
he put a redaction for it. Yeah, this is all. You need to go verify this. It was redacted, but it's still there with an edit on it that is said as redacted. I don't know how that works. Yes, this paper is no longer valid, but we're going to leave it up. But we're going to say it's redacted. Then he redid the.
Now you're blaming us for leaving our mistakes up for everyone to see.
Well, to me, I would just.
Which is it, man? Are creation scientists always dishonest about our mistakes, or
whatever? That's not usually how it works. Usually, when you redact a paper, you just remove the paper from the journal. But the thing. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the point being is that he recognized there was a mistake and he redid the experiment. And you're right, he did get about 80. I think 86%, if I'm not mistaken. 80, somewhere in the mid 80s, right? 85, 86%.
And an evolutionary biologist named Richard Buggs agrees with that estimate.
Well, I'm
not a young creationist.
Irrelevant. The problem is that
everybody. That is completely relevant. You made it relevant.
The problem that you have with the second time he did the experiment, or the BLAST program.
This is what I'm talking about.
Hang on,
man.
let me finish.
Let
me finish because you don't know where I'm going with this. Do you know the mistake he made on the second?
I have not.
That you don't.
Heard
then you don't know even if somebody says they agree with them, you don't know what they're agreeing to. You're just saying, well, this person agrees with them. So what?
You just gave me the top line number. That's what.
That's some kind of appeal to authority. If you don't even know what he agreed on. Right? Because again, I don't know what he's agreeing with because you don't know what the argument was of where he made a mistake in the second analysis. In the second analysis, this is what he did. And again, anybody can go look at this. Do you remember what an indel is?
Yes, an insertion deletion.
Yes, an indel is insertion deletion that has a number of different nucleotide changes. It can have a couple, or it can have a lot of nucleotide changes. And I'm not a biologist, but you have a degree in biology, so you either agree or disagree with this, but when you do a whole genome comparison, you don't count indels as individual nucleotide differences. You do it as one mutation because it's one-time event. It's insertion or deletion that happens at one time. So all those individual nucleotide changes are not counted as differences between monkeys, different monkeys like pan-troglodyte or ourselves. You don't count the individual nucleotide changes. He did because he wanted to get a number closer to that original 70. If you count the indels as just a one-time event, the differences are somewhere around 99%, depending on how you do it, 98 to 99 point something percent. That's a big difference.
How do we know it was an insertion or deletion? Are you talking about an insertion or deletion compared to the chimpanzee genome?
Yeah, when you look at a string of nucleotides that are changed.
That requires an assumption of common descent between chimpanzees and humans.
Well,
if there's an indel mutation that you're saying is an indel,
there has to be common ancestry, correct?
Because it's a sequence of
correct.
DNA that is different from between the two.
Mm-hmm.
If you're measuring objectively without an assumption of common descent between the two, what is the comparison of the sequences? Then you would count the whole length of a so-called indel, because we don't assume that it's an indel.
Why would you, and by the way, I'm standing for truth. You're going to join. And by the way, I swear to God as my witness, I'm not reading anything. I'm not looking anything up. I'm not Googling anything. The only thing I have up is a StreamYard. Okay. So all this is going by memory. And this is going a long time ago when I looked at Tompkins stuff. But I'm pretty sure that is the history, because I was involved with this. Well, I wasn't involved with it directly, but I was indirectly involved with it when it was happening, because of the person who was corresponding with Dr. Humphreys, and what Dr. Humphreys was changing things around. Somebody I know personally. So that's the reason why. But like I said, when you do
this is the reason why our two communities are what the philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn called incommensurable. Okay, it's because you guys use different assumptions, and you would make different calculations on this number of sequence identity between humans and chimps, because you use different assumptions.
Okay, so let me ask you, when you normally do
and we use different assumptions and we get a different number.
Well, let me ask you, when you want to compare two different species, should you normally, is this how it's normally done? Do you normally count every single solitary nucleotide difference? Is that normally how it's done?
I do not know.
Okay, that's fair enough. We'll leave that as open, that people can weigh in on, and we'll ask people that actually do it, because they're going to know more.
I do know that if you're making claims about the sequence identity between two genomes, you should compare the entire sequence.
Okay.
But if you're going to make a top line number of 99 point whatever % sequence identity, and then not count the whole sequence, I think that's
because if it's indel, it's just one. It just happened at one time, right? And the indel event occurred at one time.
Assuming common descent, you're assuming that there was a single mutation that caused.
Fair enough. I'll grant you that, arguendo. All right. So the point I was trying to make is that this whole paper by Dr. Tompkins, if he would have sent that paper out for peer review before he put it on Journal Creation, they would have caught that error, would they have not?
What error?
That the program he used had in the BLAST program had a bug. They would have caught that if he would have done it.
But the program that was widely used by lots of people. The reason that he came across the bug is he was using it in a different way than was normally used.
I agree with you. He used the ungap parameter.
He's using a widely available program. I mean, he
used the ungap parameter, which is not normally used for those things, from what I understand. You don't use the ungap.
Right, and because of that, he encountered a bug that is not normally encountered.
Okay, this is true, but it was a bug that was known
by peer review.
Well, yeah, because the bug was.
Sometimes mistakes don't get caught in peer review.
I agree, but the bug was known. But this is my point: is you can't call something peer review.
Why didn't they
Hang on, let me finish.
Before that?
They were fixing it. They had I think about that time they were just coming up, or they just had a new update on it, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's not guaranteed that the peer reviewers he would have hypothetically would have known about it.
I think the mistake that you're making is that you think peer review means, hey, this person is a friend of mine or peer, therefore that's peer review. That's not how science works in peer review.
That's not anything close to what I think.
Are you sure?
You're making an assumption that peer review would always catch every error, and that's also a false assumption.
No, I did not say that at all. I'm quite confident that they don't.
You're assuming they would have caught
but something like that, I think they would.
Error
I think
having
that they probably
to do
would.
with a software program that is not usually part of a paper.
Do you think
they don't publish the software code in the paper?
Do you think it's reasonable to assume that a layperson who doesn't even have a degree in that area, they're a computer person, but they don't have a degree in that in biology. They caught it. They knew about the error. Don't you think experts would have known about that error?
It depends on the person.
Right.
I'm not saying
Right.
that you don't have to have a PhD to be an expert in something. This software programming is very specific.
Oh, I agree.
knowledge.
This is true. Again, like, excuse me. When Dr. Loechelt wrote his paper, right, for the accelerated nuclear decay, that was accepted by an accredited journal. Okay. But
just quick question: is he the one who had all that work that you sent me 2 days ago?
Yes.
That's Loechelt. Okay.
Yeah.
Because there was another critic of the rate study helium diffusion stuff that I know was published in one of the Young Earth Creationist journals, and Humphreys responded to him in there.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
But
Well,
not
it wasn't Loechelt. Yeah, I don't think it was Loechelt either. And I don't think it was Henke either. But
I don't remember the name.
The point being is that his paper was accepted in a Christian journal, and the Young Earth Creationists, they agreed his paper was correct. They didn't find any argument or any errors with it. So don't you think that at this point the journal Creation, or do you think the Young Earth Creationists are basically saying, look, we don't have any evidence for accelerated decay? Because they don't. There's literally none. Everything they put out has been refuted through other journals that show that accelerated nuclear decay is no such thing. It would create more problems than it's worth. But they're still trying to find it. But they're still putting out there, that, oh, the heat problem has, not the higher people, but I've seen creationists do it, say, oh, the heat problem's been resolved, accelerated nuclear decay. But even the higher ups say, no, that's not the case.
I haven't seen that. I would agree the heat problem is a problem that it needs to be resolved.
Okay, I accept that.
But our models aren't the only ones with problems. There's no models in the history of science that have no problems.
Okay, and that's fair, but here's a huge distinction. The models in physics that end up in an everyone dies scenario gets discounted. They get trash canned, right?
That has no relevance to.
But it does. I'm telling you.
That's an emotional argument.
No, I'm telling you. If
the consequences of an error in a model
is pretty damning if everyone dies.
The severity of the error.
Yes, it does, because it's self-refuting.
What matters is the rational problem involved, and the problem solving, and what kind of solutions could be involved.
But think about this.
In science, data takes precedence over theories and models.
I agree with you, but here let me explain to you why this is a contradiction, at least an apparent contradiction. If the heat problem was such that accelerated decay worked, and it created so much heat that it liquefied the crust, we wouldn't be here. So I think that model, prima facie, is discounted because we're still alive. If everyone dies and the Earth is destroyed, it's probably not a good model.
I'm already admitting that is a problem.
Okay, that's good.
that can't be how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's just a problem in the model. That doesn't matter.
Everyone dies. Yeah, everyone dying is a problem. Ben Kissling. Everyone dies. It's a problem.
Not in science. The consequences aren't a problem. The problem is it doesn't jive with the data that we have.
Okay.
That's the problem.
So the last point I want to, again, you mentioned it earlier, so we can kind of wrap this up because I know I can't run too long. But if you've got any super chats and you want to subscribe to the channel, hey, now's the time to do it. This is a good convo, and I do appreciate Ben coming in. Ben's, like I said, has been on my other channel before, and we had a good time. So it is fun. It is nice to be able to talk about these things and laugh and not get visceral. But you do agree that there is something that creationist science do have to sign called a statement of faith, right?
If you join one of these organizations, yes.
I can bring it up here. I have it here. This is the only thing that I have in a tab, by the way, and I didn't even size it right, so I apologize. It's not sized right, so you're not gonna be able to see this from the outside very well. But this is literally the only tab I have up. See, okay. So I have this and StreamYards. I can't. You can't see it from the outside, and I'm not going to resize it for them. They can go find it on Answer in Genesis, but I will read it. It says, no apparent, perceived, or claimed evidence in any field of study, including science, history, and chronology, can be valid if it contradicts the clear teaching of Scripture obtained by historical grammatical interpretation. A primary point is the fact that evidence is always subjected to interpretation by fallible people who do not possess all information. Then it gives a series of biblical references. So it's very clear. It says no apparent, perceived, or claimed evidence in any field of study, including science, history, and chronology, can be valid if it contradicts the clear teaching of Scripture obtained in historical grammatical interpretation. Now, my question to you is, if science is data-driven, which I think every scientist in the world that I've ever talked to says that science is data-driven. You go where the science leads and you form a conclusion. If the science is so overwhelming at this point that everything, and even the rate study concluded that the Earth has the appearance of age, wouldn't it make more sense to get rid of your presupposition of the Earth is young and then go from there, rather than having to have all these ad hoc explanations and scenarios where everyone dies? I mean, what do you think is this more parsimonious?
I think the most parsimonious view is the one that takes account of all of the data that we have, including the data in the Bible.
But that's not empirical data. So let's make this very clear.
Yes, it is.
No, empirical data is something you observe through experimentation. This is historical data.
People who wrote Genesis chapter 5 observed...
testimonial evidence and historical evidence is not empirical evidence. Nobody will tell you otherwise that knows what they're talking about. No.
So have you yourself done the EPR experiment?
I'm not a scientist.
In 20th century?
I'm not a scientist.
Well, you trust their
I do.
Written report.
And the EPR experiment actually was pointing out something that they were wrong about, right? They actually got it wrong. Einstein was wrong about the EPR.
Yes.
Right.
But
so
they did the experiment that showed it, and so I'm talking about the experiment. You trust that the people who did that experiment,
yes, it's in the body of science,
correctly,
right?
accurately what they observed, and you trust the record.
Because that's why we have checks and balances.
It yourself,
right? That's why you have checks and balances in a body of science, right? There's no experiment that was done. What was the experiment done that there was a burning bush? What was the experiment done that there was a flood? There were
observations that were made,
but there was no experiment done. These are observations on experiment, because science is experimental. That's literally what science is. Experimental. It's what we call experimental science.
Historical events are things that occur once.
I will clarify.
You can't redo them. Just like the asteroid strike
I agree.
that hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs, according to the old age.
I agree.
You can't replicate that.
I agree. There's something.
So you have to go with tangential records that you look at. In the geological record, we can say, okay, this looks like an asteroid strike, blah, blah, blah. But you can't replicate the whole thing.
Right. There's something called observational science, right? But the actual evidential science, right? The experimental science is, okay, we want to explain something. How do we explain this big crater? How to explain the death of dinosaurs? That's experiments. They do experiments to explain those observations. There's no experiment done for the historicity of the Bible. There's no experiment done that Jesus rose from the dead. There's no experiment done that can show the age of the earth is 6,000 years done. Oh, there's no experiment that can be shown in a worldwide flood. These don't exist. But there are experiments.
That.
But they don't exist. Well, okay, show me. I've never seen one. There's no experiment done to show any of that stuff. And the only evidence they've even tried to do was the rate study, which they admitted the earth showed was old.
It's not, the rate study is not the only thing. So, for example, there's the rate of salination of the oceans has been shown to be too fast for the oceans to be billions of years old.
I think that was
the rate at which short period comets.
Well, I think hang on. Don't guess, Gallup. One thing at a time. I think the salination had to be.
You asked me first.
But hang on. But I want to address this one. I think the salinization one has actually was on creation.com as a bad argument for creationists, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
Okay.
I'm aware of the bad arguments page. I look at it.
Okay. I know the short period comment one. That's completely horrifyingly bad, because we know that short period comments can come about. There's the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud, which is hypothetical, but the Kuiper belt is not. And so we know that there's regenerative short-term comets. That came up, I think, by or at least promoted by Hovind, if I'm not mistaken.
Has that been observed? Has there been an experiment done that shows that short period comets can come out of the Kuiper belt?
No,
but the Kuiper belt is in the sun's gravitational well, is it not?
Correct, so, but that's why they would be
already in an orbit around the sun,
right? But they get knocked loose, right?
By what?
Perturbations.
Gravitational perturbations. Right, where do those come from, except from the sun?
Well, no, there's other objects out there that we haven't discovered. Well, how do you think they discovered? How do you think they discovered the trans-uranium objects because of perturbations? And there's also
the Oort cloud is completely outside of the sun's gravitational field. So
it's like 2/3 the way. It's like 2/3 of the way to Alpha Proxima.
Have to be outside of our solar system, and somehow are knocking them into a. Has that been observed?
No, but that's because that's a scientific theory.
You made an inference
because that's observational science, as I said, observational science. Right,
of things we've not seen.
So you don't think
like
that
the Oort cloud.
So what is the experiment done from the Oort cloud that shows it's young? Because at that point it becomes an argument from incredulity or ignorance.
There is no Oort cloud.
But how do you wait? How do you know that?
Why would I hypothesize something when I have a more parsimonious explanation that the solar system is young and the short period comets are just there from the beginning?
But what experiment did you done to determine there's no Oort cloud?
I don't require that hypothesis to explain.
But you're making a categorical statement. You said there's no Oort cloud. Okay, what is the data to show for that?
You can't prove a negative.
And by the way, I agree.
This is why you use parsimony.
Let me correct something. I want to correct something. Leo's correct. The Oort cloud is not outside the sun's gravitational influence. There's still gravity there, right? It's still it's very minute, but it is 2/3. If I remember correctly, it's about 1/3 or 2/3 away to the next nearest star. It's really far out there. People don't realize how far it really is out there. It's way out there. But
yes, that's what I said. I was referring. You mentioned the Kuiper belt, though, and I was talking.
The Kuiper belt is a lot closer.
The
Kuiper belt is much closer. Okay. Yeah. Okay, just want to make sure we clarify that. All right, so but again, we're at least positing an explanation for something. You're just saying, oh, the Earth is young, Oort clouds. Well, no, the Oort clouds don't, or short-term comets. That doesn't indicate a young Earth. Short-term comets is not evidence of anything.
What indicates a young Earth is that they're still here, even though they should be gone based on the amount of material they're losing on each orbit.
But again, science says, oh, we can explain
young age,
but we can explain this through other means that's more parsimonious with observations of that we do know makes the Earth old.
Positing an unobserved entity way outside the solar system and unobserved gravitational perturbations.
So what happens when they do discover the Earth?
Known to exist or knock anything into orbit.
What happens what happens when they do discover the Earth?
Additional assumptions.
But let me ask you, Ben. What happens when they do discover like the Oort cloud? Because everything for example, they posited a neutrino at one time, right? They didn't know that a neutrino existed. It was a scientific positing that explained observations, right? This is how science does actually work. You can make these hypothetical scenarios and say, okay, does the data fit it? And then you find the actual evidence afterwards. This is perfectly fine.
And sometimes you don't.
Right, so I get that.
How long should we look for them if we don't?
Well, this is relatively new. I mean, we're making huge leaps and advances in science. I mean, just right now, the James Webb Telescope has found galaxies that are so young looking and so far away that is questioning our understanding of how galaxies form. I don't think the age of the universe, right? Because some people are saying, oh, the age of the universe must be much older than 13.9 billion years. And I don't think that's what the data is showing from what I've read. It's showing that the data still is the age of the universe around 13.9, give or take. But how we understand how early galactic formations occurred, we might have to remodel those models because the models we have so far seem to work pretty well. Oh, but now we have an anomaly. Let's try to figure out why there's an anomaly. This is the same thing with the Oort cloud. So what I noticed with younger creationists do
is a failed prediction of the Big Bang theory.
No, it has nothing to do with the Big Bang. No, the Big Bang doesn't have anything to do with that.
It's a failed prediction of nucleosynthesis.
Yeah, well, it's not a failed prediction. It shows. Hang on, it's not a failed prediction though.
Yes, it was. They predicted that you would see younger appearing galaxies because
we do see younger appearing galaxies.
Far away is looking that far back in time,
which is what we see.
And they expected younger looking galaxies. What they found were the same kind of galaxies we see everywhere else.
No.
At larger redshifts.
No, the larger. The larger redshift ones we actually can show has a very different chemical consistency than ones that are closest to us. The further you look back in the universe, we're seriously looking backwards in time for all practical purposes. So when we look at those,
That's the Big Bang model. So Jason Lisle is a young Earth creationist who thinks different.
Right.
That the one-way speed of light is infinite, and he makes that assumption. And on the basis of that assumption, he made several correct predictions about what the James Webb Telescope would show.
No, he made the same predictions that anybody else would make using the.
No.
Hang on. This is not true. I just did this. This is called the Einstein synchronicity convention, correct? He has what's called the asynchronous synchronicity convention.
Anisotropic
synchrony.
I
right?
messed it up too.
Yeah, the anisotropic synchrony convention is merely saying that if you want to look at light, instead of traveling isometrically from all directions, from all vectors, as traveling at c, you can mathematically, and Jason Lisle is absolutely 100% correct on this, you can make a model that says, okay, I want the one-way speed of light to be infinite, and then you have it 1/2 c on the return trip. That's math, and that's correct. Will you agree with that? That's his model.
It's a coordinate system.
It's a coordinate system.
And the one-way speed of light is sort of like a free parameter in the coordinate system.
But here's the problem. It is a Lorentzian coordinate system. And in a Lorentzian coordinate system, it's invariant. And the problem that you run into is that if his model is correct, it would be that we are looking in space and seeing these galaxies as they actually are in real time, not as they were, correct? Instantaneously.
If that model has physical reality attached to that interpretation, yes.
Mm-hmm. So why is it when we look, the further away we look, we tend to see, on average, older galactic clusters that have less of the newer materials and more of the older materials that take a very long time for nuclear synthesis?
So you're talking about nucleosynthesis, meaning
iron, nickel, oxygen, carbon. Look at CNO reactions, right? When a star burns its helium, hydrogen out, and starts burning helium and start burning carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and goes into CNO reactions from the proton-proton cycle. Eventually, it starts trying to burn things like silicon and nickel, and eventually ends up in iron, which is not fusionable. That you have to put more energy into iron to get energy out of it. So stars that have heavy iron content, they're going to die. It's stellar death to them. But we're noticing the heavier elements are being produced the more that we go back. The further we go back, we see less of those heavier elements because we're looking at younger galaxies and younger stars because we're looking at them as they were billions of years ago. Go ahead.
We've never observed a population 3 star, and that's supposed
true.
to be the helium.
Our sun is population 2, though, right?
I don't remember.
It's Pop 2 star, yeah.
But we've never observed a Pop 3 star. We were supposed to observe stars with the James Webb Space Telescope that were back far enough in time that they would have only hydrogen, helium, and maybe a little. I grant you that was probably an expectation. That has not been observed. That's a failed prediction of the nucleosynthesis.
No, again, that's where I think you make the mistake. It's not a failed prediction. Well, it's a failed understanding of modeling so far, and it is. If you want to call it failed prediction, that's fine. But hang on. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Newtonian physics wasn't falsified because. Hang on, let me finish.
You don't. If you have lots of other good reasons that the model is true, which is precisely why we know that the
creationists
accept that there was accelerated nuclear decay,
which doesn't have any evidence for.
Yes, we do.
No, there's not.
At the very least, we have the Bible that says.
The Bible.
How old the Earth is.
You know what? I'm at least happy that you agreed that the entire reason why young Earth creationists think all of science is wrong is because of the Bible. That's it. No science, but Bible, which is to me, it's not science.
That's not the only reason. That's not what I admitted. I just said that the Bible counts as data, observational data. Now, we accept that, and we understand other people don't. But that just means that we have a different set of basic assumptions that is essentially an arbitrary. It's a bias on both sides. Okay, so I would say I would admit to you, okay, that because I'm a Christian, I have a higher amount of confidence in the historical data in the Bible. Okay, that is something I can freely admit.
Why?
And that is also
why though. And it's not observational data. There's no possible way you can make that argument.
Because I have all kinds of other parts of my worldview that I have all kinds of other reasons for, including the accuracy of the Bible, that help me, that have convinced me that the Bible is an accurate record of the world. And if someone doesn't share that with me, then I would say, that's a different basic assumption. That's a different presupposition. But you can't say that I have presuppositions and you don't, and therefore what I do is not science and what you do is, because we have different presuppositions.
But here's the difference.
About what
the presuppositions you have, I don't need to do science. I don't need it. You don't need to have creationism. I used to operate.
You don't need your presuppositions.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You have to. We both agreed on the initial
presupposition. One of your presuppositions that you stated very clearly is methodological naturalism. We don't need that to do science.
Okay, then what would you use instead?
We just drop that rule.
Okay, so you believe
and we allow other explanations as possible explanations for phenomena.
All right, so let's drop that rule. I say, hey, we're no longer adhering to methodological naturalism. I see an observation. I'm going to hypothesize leprechauns did it. And I'm going to spend my time arguing leprechauns did it and try to do experiments.
Have you observed what leprechauns can do?
Have you observed what God can do?
We can observe what intelligence can do.
But you've never observed a disembodied mind do anything.
We can observe what intelligences can do. They can create information. We're doing it right now by speaking.
Have you ever observed a non-physical entity, a mindless entity, create intelligence?
A mindless entity
create intelligence? A physical, a bodiless, a mind without a body.
Have I ever observed a mind without a body?
Correct.
I have not seen a mind. A mind is not a material thing. What I do is I infer its existence. Do you doubt that I have a mind?
No, I'm not a solipsist. But I don't. Okay. I don't. But you have. But every mind that you've seen. I mean in general, every mind that you've interacted with, right? I'm interacting with your mind. Every mind you've ever interacted with has a component physical substrate, a brain, a physical body. Every one of them. You've never seen a disembodied mind, some kind of ambiguous, nebulous intelligence, do anything. We've never observed this.
You can't observe something that's immaterial in the way that you're asking us to do it. What we can do is we can infer its existence the way many scientists infer the existence of non-observable entities like the Oort cloud.
But that's a physical thing. That's a physical thing. That's not
the only thing preventing us from positing an unobserved intelligence versus an unobserved Oort cloud is methodological naturalism, the requirement that all explanations be natural things.
Correct.
And so when you don't think should have that rule. When you drop that rule, there's no particular reason why we can't infer
magic,
an immaterial mind as a cause.
You could posit magic as a cause, could you not? Why did this person get sick? Because Ben cast a spell and made them sick. I could posit that, and I could do experiments on that and waste everybody's time. Could I not?
I don't think that's what would happen.
It's exactly what would happen.
We don't suggest magic.
That's exactly what would happen. And that's one of the reasons science does adhere and does have what's called non-overlapping magisteria, not to waste time with those kinds of things. Now, can science falsify certain claims like psychic things? Sure.
There are lots of things we shouldn't waste time with. But it's dependent on your assumptions, which things you think are a waste of time or not, because we can't tell ahead of time what's going to turn out to be correct or not. And so which things you spend your time which problems you spend your time trying to solve are going to be based on the models you accept and your assumptions. All right.
Do you accept? I mean, do you think magic exists?
What?
Do you think magic exists? Magic.
No.
You don't think people can cast spells?
No.
Do you think people can be psychic?
No.
Okay. So all those people that are promoting mentalism, and I don't mean like the stage magic, but I'm like people that actually purport to be actual mind readers and psychics and clairvoyant and tarot readers and chiromancy. You think that's all false?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
But what I would say though is that there are scenarios that I do believe in that could be at work in situations like that.
Satan.
That is, for example, demon possession.
Demon possession. Okay.
Like that.
All right. So you believe in demon possession. Okay.
That's not something that I would think would be an appropriate topic.
No, that's for another show, I think. All right, so I know I get you. So let me kind of wrap this up, and I appreciate the dialogue, man. I really do. I mad props to you. I seriously do. A lot of people get scared to kind of put their beliefs and views on the line, and you're up there. Yeah, no, let's talk about it. So hey, seriously, mad props. Let's take some last minute questions from the audience, maybe.
Yeah, it was fun.
Cool.
I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And and by the way, I'm noticing a lot of people going, man, Steve over in NonSequitur Show, they can get, maybe a little heated sometime, but I mean, it's always with respect, unless you're flat earther, then go piss off. But I mean, other than them, I have a lot of respect for people, even young with creationists, like I said, that I get along with. And there's many of them in the live chat right now. I get along with many of them. I think because, some of them show me the same consideration. And that I don't see from flat earthers, right? Flat earthers don't, they have no consideration for anybody. But at least with younger creationists like Dr. Safadi and many of the other ones I know, there's a mutual, I think, a level of respect, even though his level is way beyond mine. He was nice enough to put one of my arguments on creation.com that he supported, and I found that to be, very charitable. And so, it doesn't have to be rancorous. It doesn't have to be at people's throats. I don't like that kind of dialogue any longer. Not saying that I haven't participated in it before, but I do want to elevate the discussion a little bit higher. And I think
who hasn't in the age of the internet,
right? Yeah, no, right? Yeah, own it, right? Everybody's been there. And we will be rancorous with flat earthers probably, because I hope that you at least agree with me that flat earthers, even if they base it on their biblical arguments, are just flat out wrong.
Yeah, I would say that's an issue that is probably not worth addressing at all. By not saying you shouldn't, but just in general. So, for example, Jason Lyle has spent quite a bit of time debunking flat earthism,
yes.
and I think that's just a waste of time.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree.
Wish you would do something else with this time.
I think that he does is because it is kind of prevalent. It's kind of his area, and they're Christians that are doing this, right? So it makes Christians look bad when they're putting out flat Earth. I mean.
Yeah, but the problem is you're not going to win a debate with people like that, because they're not,
Yeah, I don't think they're looking for truth. I really don't. I think that flat earthers go out of the way.
Honestly, the best way to debunk flat Earth is to explain to them that almost nobody ever in history believed this. One of the problems is that atheists have convinced everybody that Christianity used to believe in a flat Earth prior to Columbus.
That's another show, because I think people would argue against that.
Every Christian who believes that lie, the historical lie, now believes they must defend the flat Earth because that's what the Bible says.
See, I think there's more to it than that.
That comes from an atheist position.
No. I've talked to Christians. I've talked to Christians that have said that some of the models they argued with for Gehol, Sheol and Gehenna, and the way they looked at the spheres was flat Earth like, and even Christians have admitted to this. Now, whether that was prevalent, some have already said yes, some have said no. I don't know, and I don't really care whether it was prevalent back then or not. To me, it's completely irrelevant. The fact remains is that in the 21st century, we absolutely have concluded that the flat Earth is false. But this goes into the whole, they start with presuppositions that they're never going to get rid of. And I find that to be the exact same thing creationists have. They start with presuppositions that they cannot ever get rid of, no matter what observation we have that shows otherwise. They will always have it. And, what are you going to do? But anyways, I don't think they have any questions. So let's kind of wrap this up, because I do got to go. Guys, head over to my other channel, Steve McRae. I'm going to be doing a live show on that. But I want to thank Ben for joining. You got anything you want to promote?
Just to have a podcast called Macrophage Strategy that I'm trying to get back into. I've been sick for the last 6 months, a couple times. So
well, I hope you're feeling better. I've been perfect either. I know what you're feeling. Sucks, right?
Yeah, I had 2 different weird issues that lasted a couple months each.
Yeah, man, it sucks not being on your game, right?
Yeah. So, but I should have a new episode coming out soon.
Well, I hope you're feeling better. I really do. I'm going to put. Can you send me a link to your podcast, because I don't think I have it.
Sure.
And I'll put it in the video description, because I like promoting. Should I put your Twitter on there too?
Sure.
All right, I'll add that in after, So, Ben, thank you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to become a supporter of the channel, we do have Patreon, and the video link, we have the join. Also, you can leave any donation on the a comment. I'll read them out next time. Helps keep the lights on for the show. But I'm glad that you guys enjoy this. I'm glad that this was a amicable and informative discussion, and I will be doing much more like these. Unfortunately, we're supposed to have another person come on. He wasn't able to make it. But I did notice that Standing for Truth was out there saying stuff. I like to have Donnie on. Donnie and I have known each other for quite some time. So, you know Donnie, right? You're friends with Standing for Truth?
Oh, I know SFT. I don't know him personally, no.
Okay. Awesome. All right, that, guys, I'm going to leave the StreamYards and end the stream. Like I said, please head over to my other channel if you want to watch some other content. Leave comments. If you are watching this now or if you're watching it after the fact, please leave a comment. It really does make a difference, and I enjoy reading them. Okay? And with that, I'm going to bid you adieu, Ben, because I got to go, and good night.